Back in February of 2008, I decided that I need a change in my monotonous life. Whether that change would come in the form of a new job or a new toothbrush, I didn't know. I was never the most adventurous person. I've always found it difficult to veer away from my comfort zone, and the limit of my existence usually depended on which book I was reading at the time. It took me a while to realize that my happiness often derived from stories that my mind was living in. I was an avid bookworm, a miserable as I could be. I realized that my true outlet, I immediately knew. Once I realized my true outlet, I immediately knew what I wanted. I purchased a small shop, quit my boring job, and renovated the building and transformed it into a bookstore. I had never been happier. The next 2 years were the best of my life. The store had become a huge hit with locals, and my perspective on the work had been completely altered, and I was feeling genuinely happy for the first time since my childhood. It was during the winter of 2010 that she walked into my bookstore. She stepped inside out of the snow and approached me with a large bin bag. Etchings of age covered her pale face and hands. She must have been at least 80 years old. Slamming the bag on the counter, she simply said, "These are for you." I looked inside the bag to find a selection of some of the greatest novels ever written. "Why? Do you want money for these, or some sort of book trade?" I asked confusingly. "No, they're yours. Take them." She gave me a feeling of uneasiness. Her dirty gray fringe slightly concealed her face as a cold gaze met my vision. "Are you sure you want me to have them? You wouldn't rather sell them?" "No, I have no use for them. No for money." Okay, thank you. What's your name?" "Lucy." She muttered her final words and left my store. I found it all strange that somebody would give away such great books for nothing, but I suppose some people are just nice. I made my way home and took the books with me so that I could go through them. I piled them up on the table and was surprised to see that all of them were in fantastic condition. A couple of them seemed to be first editions, and others were versions that I'd never even seen before. It took me a moment to realize, but the novels I was looking at were not as I had remembered them to be. The first book I picked up was The Green Mile. On the cover there was an image of John Coffey smiling, holding two dead naked girls. I opened it up and flicked through the pages. In this version of the novel, he was in fact guilty of rape and murder of both children. I made my way to the end of the book to read the execution scene. All of the officers who had grown to love John Coffey in the original novel were now laughing uncontrollably, screaming racial taunts while he was being executed. My eyes had seen enough, and my stomach felt that it was enough too. The next book I picked up was Catcher in the Rye. The artwork upon the front page seemed to be of a dead body splattered across the street, drawn from an aerial view. I flicked through the book until I reached chapter 14, after Holden Caulfield speaks of messing with the idea of suicide. He suddenly breaks down in tears and jumps from a window, cracking his skull on the pavement below. The book abruptly ended after that. I then picked up Lord of the Flies. The defining image of this novel was of a large child with the face of a pig. He was covered in blood and surrounded by decaying corpses. After gazing through the pages, I reached to the point in the story where Piggy is described as being non-human, vicious, and a hungry animal. A chapter later or so, Jack insults Piggy which leads him into losing his temper and ripping him apart. Piggy then proceeds to kill and then eat the rest of the children. The remainder of the book was the same line repeated over and over. Pigsy sat alone on the island, waiting for death. I read through the books that were left on the pile. All of them have been changed in some sort of sick way. The Great Gatsby, Wuthering Heights, To Kill a Mockingbird, Ulysses, every one of them. Just as I reached the bottom of the pile, I noticed that the final book was one that I never even heard of before. It was called The Last of the Spokes. I found this slightly unnerving because I immediately paled it with my name, Aaron Sparks. Still, it was just a book. The front of the cover was 6 gravestones with words too small to be read, etched in granite. I looked up into the top corner of the book and noticed that there was a sell-by date on it. It was in 2013. I nervously opened it up and began reading the story. Chapter 1. Alice Sparks. My stomach dropped as I read my mother's name upon the page. I felt dizzy and confused as I anxiously made my way through the chapter. It seemed to detail a regular day in the life of the character, until I reached the last page. Alice was crossing over the road when the heel of her shoe broke, causing her to fall. She didn't get to her feet fast enough, and a speeding driver struck her, puncturing both of her lungs. I felt sick to my stomach. I pulled the book down and got straight into bed, hoping for some sleep. I lay awake all night as countless questions ran through my mind. The only thought that managed to put me to sleep was, it's just a book. The next morning, I got to work. I was feeling worse for wear. It wasn't until around lunchtime that I began to perk up and regain a bit of energy. Then the phone rang. I answered the call to my father crying on the other end. Immediately I knew what had happened. I closed the shop and ran to the hospital, but it was already too late. She was gone. Hit by a speeding driver, they said. I spent the next couple of weeks helping take care of my dad. Me, my brother, and my sister stayed with him in turns while we looked after him. We all looked after each other. It wasn't until a few months later that I picked up The Last of the Sparks. It scared me so much the last time. I opened up to page 37, and there it was. Chapter 2, Patrick Sparks. The story was more of the same, a day in the life, right up until the part where he shot himself in the kitchen while on the phone with his son. I ran to the phone to speak with him, to comfort him, but then I realized what I may be doing. The phone picked up on the other end. Before I could say a word, he was gone. I got my black suit and tie out once more and repeated the same process for another parent. It ruined us all. After the funeral, I refused to touch the book. What if I caused these deaths just by reading it? I couldn't go through it all again. But on the eve of Christmas 2011, I got a phone call from my brother's wife, Heather. Will had been putting up Christmas lights on the roof when he slipped on ice and broke his neck. He died almost instantly. I threw the phone against the wall and began to sob into my sleeve. Anger took the pain away for a moment as I picked up the book and read through to chapter 3. It was exactly as Heather had described. I fell asleep and woke up the next day with the book still in my lap. I decided to go check on who was going to be the next out of me and my sisters, and hopefully warm them, or myself in some way. I turned to the page, chapter 4, Mary and Sarah Sparks. I rushed through the story as fast as I could until I reached the end. Both of my sisters and their partners were drowned in a lake after colliding with another car on a one-way bridge. That same sickly feeling took over me. I met with my sisters later that day to exchange gifts, and I told them calmly as I could muster to be careful while driving. I had to sound as sane as possible, mentioning the lake and the bridge, and the fact that all 4 of them would be in the car at the same time, but at least I told them. Mary and Sarah drowned 8 months later in August 2012. After I went to the funeral, I picked up the book and turned to the final pages. Chapter 5, Aaron Sparks. But I didn't read it. I'd rather not live in fear for so long, so I decided to save it for nearer the time. After all, there was a sell-by date on it for a reason. Everything has been normal for the past 5 months or so. Although I lost interest in reading, I'm back to my old miserable self. I question myself every day as to why she is doing this to me. But it didn't matter, it's all going to be over soon anyways. I've just finished reading the final chapter. It's the date on the sell-by, and I'm sitting in my basement, waiting for her to arrive. That's how the ending goes. Oh, so I've read.